Well, hi everyone. I'm so excited that so many people are expressing an interest in building engagement plans for outreach. It's something that I'm incredibly passionate about, and I hope you'll leave today with some good ideas to start on your own campus. So I am currently a librarian here at Appalachian State University, and if you want to follow me on Twitter and keep the conversation going, please feel free to follow me at Jen Natali. Okay, I want to start by at least telling you a little bit about my perspective, because I think depending on where you come from, your perspective might be a little bit different. And mine comes from a background in student development and also nonprofit administration before I went into librarianship. So a lot of that work that I did actually played into my efforts in outreach and my thinking about outreach. So I just want to put that out there, that that's kind of the direction that I'm coming from when I look at outreach. So my goals for today are to really encourage you to contemplate the possibilities of what you may be able to do on your campus, within your library, in your community, to look at outreach activities. I'm going to give you some really concrete steps. I love to be really practical, and I think it's helpful when I'm given some practical steps that I can take in order to get something started. So I will give you some really concrete steps today. And finally, I hope to begin to create a bit of a community among ourselves. It was wonderful to see how many people registered for this webinar. So obviously there's a lot of interest in outreach, and hopefully we can connect with one another and begin to share our ideas and work together. I think many of us are doing great things on our campuses, in our libraries, so why not work together? We don't all present at conferences or do webinars or other things. That doesn't mean we can't connect and share what we're doing and learn from each other, and hopefully improve what we're doing in our outreach efforts. So again, a little bit of my perspective when I think about academic librarianship. I'm really coming from a point of view that we're part of the entire campus community. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to be an integral part of what's happening on the campus to develop our students that are going out into the world, and we hope are making a great difference. So I really like to think about outreach as really feeding into that university environment, and I think that's helpful for us to sometimes get out of our perspective of just being within the library system. We're important partners in the campus community, and I think if we take that perspective, it really will enable us to be much more effective. So when I talk about outreach, I'm thinking about a few different things, part of which is seeking out students at the point of need. Sometimes in our library systems, we may sit back and wait for students or faculty to ask for help from us. And obviously, thinking about outreach is really going out to our faculty, our students, and really trying to decide where they might need us, and going out, connecting with them, offering services, offering different opportunities to them at the right point in time. So that's the perspective. I also am thinking about this, about reaching students in an academic setting, which might be their subject, their major, but more importantly in co-curricular affiliations. So many of us are subject librarians. I am a subject librarian now at Appalachian, and we're working within our academic departments, but there's this wonderful untapped potential in reaching students in their co-curricular activities. They have a particular affiliation with a group, a connection. It might mean that they have unique needs within that group. So if we can connect with them in that way as well, we're really making sure that we're not missing anyone. And that's a bit of the point in doing our outreach in a library system. The other part of it is to really develop partnerships across the university. If you think of the university group of team members, then we're an actual important part of that. We want to make sure we get into that university system. And finally, we're really trying to market what we do, right? We have services and we have resources, we have spaces, We're trying to put that out there to make sure all of those things are being used to their best potential. Another piece of outreach, it has a bit of a marketing feel to it. So the reason I put this webinar together is to really encourage you to think about creating an engagement plan, really taking time to be thoughtful and plan as your first step. Really sit back and think about what you want to do. Think about the student populations, for example, that you want to connect with. Take some time to really do this well, and how you're going to develop these partnerships across the university, how you're going to promote the libraries, and what particular resources or spaces you want to promote. And you really don't get a chance to make, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. So if you take some time to really put together a great plan, when you go out to try to connect and build an outreach effort, you'll be really professional and you'll really be put together, you'll have a plan. And I found that I really received great response from that. I have yet to have a campus partner say no to me. And I think a big part of that is that I've done my homework and I've really gone in really prepared and presented it in a way that they realized that my efforts were to try to help their students succeed. So this is what I'm going to talk about today, is these 6 components that I think you should consider as you create an engagement plan for your outreach efforts. So I'm going to go through these one at a time, and I'm going to give you some different ideas from different student populations that I've worked with to give you some examples for each of these areas. And I also don't want to forget that much of this planning can be applied to academic departments as well. So when we are liaison librarians to academic departments or divisions, a lot of this work can apply in a very similar way. We're just looking at an academic department and understanding how to engage with them and creating a plan as well. So I hope you'll take it in both regards and maybe take some ideas to the work that you do as a liaison. Okay, so step 1 is really think about what population you want to target for outreach. And this is really unique. There's no one fit for all of us. You really need to look at your campus culture. What is your student population like? Do you have unique students that could use additional services or outreach efforts? So for example, when I worked at Miami University, we had a population of international students that we realized would be a great connection that we could look at. Here at Appalachian, we have a high number of transfer students. So really take some time, look at your campus culture, and decide where you might be able to create some wonderful outreach efforts. If you're not really sure, you can also look at your campus structure. Typically, a campus will have offices that work with those students that are a particular population. So you might see that you have a student veteran resource center, like we do here at Appalachian, or a transfer student office. So if you look at your campus structure, that might also give you some wonderful ideas and partners that you could work with to start to build your efforts. The other thing is to follow your passion. I know for myself, the very first library outreach program that I started was in working with student athletes. And I pursued that because I was a student athlete. And I remember the challenges that I had as an athlete trying to balance my academics and my athletics, and wishing that I had had some better supports. And I just really felt that that was an important population. And also, it was a population with a high number of ethnically diverse students. So again, I felt that would be a wonderful place to really target some one-on-one and group outreach efforts. So look at your campus, think about what your passion is, and find that area, that niche that you can pursue. So here are some population examples that are pretty common on university campuses. You might have international students, veterans, athletes, distance education students, transfers, first generation. There's a wide number of different kinds of populations. And I'll give you some examples as we go along for some of these different populations. But think about the students who might be coming to your universities either underprepared or maybe they have unique challenges, and really look at working with those students more closely. Okay, so step 2, as librarians, we love research. So sometimes we forget to do this for ourselves. So in your engagement plan, I want you to really think about doing some research. Look at your institutional data and information about your student demographics. Do a literature review. You can look at how your student population in the literature is supported through higher education, or you might find library-specific literature about how different libraries are working with student populations. You can also do some research into your campus support services. What is available on your campus? Who's working with these students? And you can also do some research to understand what the unique challenges are of your student population. I think there's literature out there for just about every student population that you can find. So tap into that, collect some of that information, and use this as a foundation for what you're going to build in your outreach efforts. So here's an example if you were going to think about working with international students, is you might look at your institutional data and see how many international students you had on your campus and maybe what countries they're from. What have other libraries done to work with international students? There's some wonderful literature out there in higher ed and in libraries about efforts to support information literacy skills with international students. Look at what your campus support services are. So you might have an international support services office or particular organizations, even your writing center that might be working closely with international students. Do some research on what their challenges are. You might find that English language proficiency is a challenge, asking for help, use of information, those kinds of things. In my experience at Miami University, in doing a little research, we found that we had a unique program at the university that students who were conditionally admitted to the university as international students into a particular program because their language skills through a TOEFL test score were a little bit lower than what they needed to be actually fully matriculated. So this was a unique student population that had 300 new students starting every semester, and a little bit of research showed that 99% of those students were from China. So again, that provided some really rich information for me to consider as I built a program for how I would connect with them, what their information literacy challenges were, and how I could integrate in with that department to make sure they weren't missing out. One of the aspects for our program were that these students weren't going through the traditional first-year student coursework. So they were missing some of our information literacy that we provided at the foundational level. So here was a way I could actually integrate in with their course that they were being offered through that program. And it was a huge success, I think. And it really took a little bit of research to notice those subtle changes and be able to create a program that would fit those unique needs. Okay, so step 3 is let's really dig in and look at who our partners are that we can work with on our campus. So look at who else specifically supports the student population that you want to work with. Look at what services they provide. Obviously, we offer a unique perspective, in particular with research support and information literacy skill development, but see what services are being provided. It might give you some ideas on where you can actually integrate into this system that's on your campus. There's typically some sort of a support system, so how do we find our place in that? And if you really look into your campus, You might find some unique places where you can integrate. And I think on our campuses, we don't always see everything that's going on. So the more that we can look into this, the better we'll learn about how to help our students. So one example for this might be to look at what committees are on your campus. I know I was able to get involved in a university-wide committee that was looking at support for international students. As we worked through that committee, we realized we didn't know all the different departments and all the different supports that were being provided across the campus. So it allowed me to actually promote what the libraries was doing and to learn from others what was happening and how I might be able to integrate into that, again, system of support. So here's an example in terms of student athletes. So student athletes typically have some sort of an academic support service within the athletics department. That is a wonderful triangle that you can create if you can build a relationship with that support service. So students, for example, are going to their athletic advisor to get support on their academics, and they're following up with those students about how they're doing. And I found that that connection really created that wonderful triangle where they would contact me and connect me with a student that they knew needed my support. So it really created a full circle of support where that student was being connected to what they needed. In working with student athletes, I actually started by doing training for the academic support services and for the tutors that worked with student athletes. I realized that those folks didn't really know what we did and how our online systems worked and really how the process worked for students to connect into the support that we provided. So this was a wonderful way to really start and build that connection with them. I also found that the Writing Center was offering targeted support for student athletes. So I was able to combine forces with them as well. Some of the folks from our Writing Center were actually providing coursework in the summer before these first-year students started their full matriculation in the fall. So we were able to provide information literacy instruction. I was able to do a library orientation for these first-year student athletes who probably wouldn't find the time to connect with that once the fall started with their athletic commitments. So that was really important. And finally, don't forget about your library team. You may have other folks in your library who are somehow connected with your student population. Maybe, for example, with student athletes, you're finding they're in a few different majors in a more concentrated way. Our international students, many of them were in the School of Business. So why not partner with your business librarian and try to work with that in terms of providing programming or specific resources that relate to those majors you might find a bulk of your students in. So whatever it may be, really go through and look at who you can partner with. We're certainly not alone in the work that we're doing, and we really can have a greater impact if we all work together. All right, step 4 is to really think about desired outcomes, and I use this term a little bit loosely, but what we're trying to think about is how are we impacting student success? And that could be that we're looking at decreasing library anxiety. It might be that we're trying to provide a real personal connection to help students in our population group to connect with an individual person, which feels much more connected than maybe the building as a place. If you have a name and a face, it feels a lot less intimidating to connect. So that could be part of our outcome. Obviously, many of us are looking at improving information literacy skills, whether we're looking at research and making good decisions about the quality of information that we use. Even just using our library spaces. You know, how do first-year students come in and know how to use our library and book our study rooms? Those things, if you can get over those barriers by making personal connections, you start to build this resource where students will come to you and ask you for help as things get more complicated. Your desired outcomes might really connect to your university or library goals. You can look at things like retention, support for diverse students. So all of the work that we do is really trying to feed into what our university and our library is hoping to accomplish as well. So again, remember that our step 4 is to really think about how we're going to impact student success. Step 5, now let's think about how we're actually going to approach this and begin to build how we're going to engage with our student population. My first suggestion with this is to build a proposal. When I very first wanted to provide personal librarian or outreach efforts to student athletes, I actually did my research and I created a formal proposal before I went and scheduled a meeting. I think it really allowed me to document different ways that I could support student athletes and help with their success. I realized there were some key areas that were concerned within athletics. They were concerned about students understanding plagiarism, for example, and how they might be able to get up to speed, because plagiarism was a real concern. Obviously, they could lose their athletic scholarship. They could not be a student anymore, for example. So plagiarism was an important piece that I realized. So in building that proposal, I talked about ways I could connect with those students, the personalization of library services, that the athletic support staff would have a person to contact and connect with students. And I suggested some different activities that I might be able to provide for them. Things like workshops and research hours in their space, that kind of thing. So once I built that proposal, I contacted the athletic department to schedule a meeting. And I went right to the athletic director. You can really look at who the right person would be depending on the campus partner that you're trying to connect with, and schedule a meeting. Go one-on-one and meet with these folks and pitch your idea that you want to provide these services to students. And again, I haven't had anyone say no, because I've really clearly outlined what I'm planning to do and how I'm trying to impact student success. And everyone wants their students to succeed. So if you start there, it really can help with your engagement in your process. From there, think about identifying courses that you might be able to integrate into. You might find national students are all required to take a particular course at the beginning of their college term, or student athletes all take a class in the summer, or they have an intro class to the university in their fall semester. Think about how you might integrate in there, and if you provide suggestions, oftentimes people will gladly work with you in order to make those connections and integrate you in. Also look at activities. What are the kinds of things that happen throughout the year with your student population? Whether it's a welcome barbecue that's open for that student population and you can make an appearance and connect and meet students. Are there orientation events? Are there times and things like recruitment for student athletes? I had the opportunity to be involved in some recruitment events where I got to meet parents and students and help them understand that the library is a part of the support system that they would be coming into if they became a student. Then from here, start to create learning materials. These could be things like online videos, LibGuides. You might look at orientation events or activities that you could create for your student population. Or it could be even a matter of how will you market something that the library is already doing and market it specifically for your student population. Maybe there's some targeted way you can engage those students and connect them with things that are already going on. And then finally, really think about your workload and your timelines before you dive into this process. This can be challenging, and I hope that this is a really good time now as we're getting towards the end of the spring semester for you to actually start to think in the summer about some things you might want to try in the fall. But plan this out. I'm a big proponent of putting deadlines and dates to things for myself and being realistic about what I can accomplish in a particular timeline. Many of us are doing outreach efforts in addition to our daily duties that we normally work with: instruction, reference support, research consultations. How will this engagement through your outreach efforts impact that? And be very thoughtful and kind to yourself as you think about how you're actually going to work through this process. In my last job, I actually dove into things a little too quickly. I got a number of initiatives going all at the same time, and all of a sudden, as that built and it grew, I ended up with too much on my plate, and I really kind of struggled to find some balance. So be kind to yourself and think about how this might proceed over a length of time, so you consider your workload. Okay, so let's look at an example of how we might build that engagement or approach piece. You might write a proposal of support of how you might support veterans, really keying in on what their unique needs are. You might find that your veterans on campus are slightly older students because they have gone through the military and then come back to school. So what are the challenges that those students are facing that you can write into your proposal? Schedule a time to meet with whoever coordinates support for veterans on your campus. You might create a LibGuide addressing their unique needs and making sure they see who the librarian is that they can contact. And again, when we think about this engagement, it isn't that we are the sole person in the library that's going to provide all of this support, but rather that we're the gateway into the library. If we can, again, personalize this where we help students to see that there's a name and a face, I can't answer every question. If a student comes to me and has a real specific question within the School of Business, well, I'm going to connect them to our business librarian. So don't feel like you have to do this all alone, but build that in, that you are, in essence, you're a gateway into all that the library has to offer and all of the expertise that's available. You also might begin to plan what activities you might have. You might want to plan research hours within their space for these students, or plan some sort of an orientation activity or a workshop. You know, if you found that student veterans were often talking about their challenges in learning library technology, you know, maybe that's a workshop that you plan for these students. But really, if you think about this and really plan this out, how you're going to actually engage this, again, you'll be in a much better position to parse this out in your schedule and take it step by step, and it will actually build into a wonderful support system. All right, step 6, and it's a step that's near and dear to my heart and something we always really need to consider, and that is assessment. And we want to make sure that we look at how we're impacting, if we're making an impact with our efforts. It's one thing to go out and do all of these things, but how do we know if it's made a difference? Have we reached our desired outcomes? Do we see that students' information literacy skills are improving? And I encourage you to think about these things early on in the planning process, because if you don't think about assessment and plan for it, you might miss out, and you might realize that there was an opportunity to do some assessment and you hadn't really planned it in, and then it's too late to backtrack and put that in your process. So plan ahead. Consider multiple approaches for assessment. It can be quantitative, it can be qualitative. You might do survey research. It can be lots of different types of data collection that you can do. Be really thoughtful about it and timely in the collection of your data. And finally, think about institutional review board. If you plan to collect information that will have personally identifiable information, you'll need to go through your institutional review board. So if you're planning to start an outreach effort and it starts next week and you want to do a survey that's going to collect students' names, you will not be able to complete that if you didn't go through your institutional review board. So make sure you are up to date on your training for your institutional review board. I know when I came to my new job here at Appalachian, that's one of the first things I did. So that way I knew I was set. If I ever wanted to do some research, I was ready to go. And again, planning ahead will allow you to submit to your review board if you are going to collect that kind of information and you need to have their approval. So here's some examples of what you might consider with your assessment activities. You might do some pre and post tests. Things like information literacy skills or library anxiety. There is a lot of information out there. Again, rely on the literature that's out there and a lot of tests and things that have already been created and validated. Look at using some of those in your process as well. You don't need to create things from scratch. We also are a community of practice where we can help one another, and we might have some opportunity to share different things that we're doing. But in my process, I have found that there's a lot out there that I've been able to pull from and use. Tie into things that you're already doing. You might already be doing an information literacy skills assessment. If you can look at your subset population within that, wonderful. We also collect a lot of data already. So we may be able to look at information literacy instruction sessions that we've done or how many research consultations we've done. If you think about tracking your data a little bit more specifically, you can actually look from semester or year to year and see what that usage is, whether it goes up or where you're meeting a need in particular. So some of those easy numbers that we already collect are there. Just make sure you document some of that. So for example, when I was working with student athletes, I always made a note of who that student was that I was meeting with if they were in a student population group for me. So I would note that a research consultation was with an athlete. That way when I went back to look at my statistics over that semester, I was able to really document what my impact had been in that very, very simple way. But pre and post tests are also really important. I think as we're looking at information literacy skills, we want to make sure we're finding whether we're making an impact. There are challenges with this process as well, and I want to make sure that I acknowledge that. When you embark on outreach efforts, your workload can really increase. So this is sometimes a scary endeavor in that if we invite them to come, they will. And sometimes that means it's an increased workload. So again, be really thoughtful about how you go about this process and the support system you have within your library. Make sure you're communicating with the other folks in your library so they understand what these initiatives are and the fact that you might see an uptick in usage by particular students. Try to balance it out and look at the other work that you're doing and find the best balance you can, but it can be a real challenge. Another challenge is depending on the organization of your librarians and staff within your library, you might feel like you're stepping on people's toes. There are some subject librarians who may feel very strongly that they are the ones that work with students within their particular department. Well, your athletes, your international students, your first generation students, they're going to be in all disciplines. So there's a risk sometimes in kind of stepping on toes that some people are a little bit sensitive to that. Again, really utilize communication and talking through things. You also can be a referral source. You know, maybe that first point of contact is you, but you connect them with another librarian. But again, there are a lot of students who have unique needs and maybe are underprepared. I would rather them get service from multiple librarians than none at all. So I'm not really too afraid of that. I just really use communication as an important piece to make sure everyone knows what's going on and what's happening. And a final challenge is, from a university-wide perspective, you might have a hard time getting in on things like committees or work groups in order to be able to provide a voice for the library services that you're offering for this particular student population. Don't despair, keep working at it. Have someone advocate on your behalf, for example. If there's a new committee that's been announced, or an existing committee for that matter, and you'd really like to be on that committee, you could really connect with the campus support systems for your student group. Well, talk to your dean or your supervisor if you're having a hard time getting on that committee. Maybe they know someone. Maybe their voice in recommending that you be a part of this would help you find an in and get in on that committee so you could make a difference. So don't be afraid of that as well. Keep with it. Be tenacious. You'll get there eventually, but it can be a challenge. And then make sure you're bringing your knowledge back to the library. When I was working with international students, I learned so much about what was going on the campus and different cultural norms for the students I was working with. So send out email updates about meetings you were at and information you learned. Hold discussions. It could be something, a formalized meeting. It could be, you know, a join me for lunch in the staff lounge and let's talk about this. You might actually even want to create workshops or professional development opportunities that you bring into the library. I know in working with international students, we wanted to learn about our own cultural competencies, particularly in understanding Chinese culture. So we had an expert from our campus community come in and do workshops for our entire faculty and staff. And I thought this was really beneficial because if you are the one person that's doing this research and making these connections, when you leave, that can be a problem. That can really mean that the work that you've done just disappears, or it might be a struggle for the next person to pick that back up. So if you're bringing that expertise and that knowledge back into the university, everyone is benefiting from that, which again means that that entire team is providing better support to that student population. So that wraps up the specific steps that I would suggest as you build an engagement plan. I would love to hear your questions in the chat, and please feel free, if I don't get to all the questions today, you can reach out to me at my email address or on Twitter. I would be happy to connect back with you. And if you have ideas of things that you're doing and you'd like to connect with others, I'd be really happy to be that conduit for us to group together and really tackle some of these wonderful outreach efforts that we want to pursue on our campuses.